Hey everyone, how y'all doing?
Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you so much for being patient with us as we just iron out some technical difficulties, but I think we're all set. We've got a great afternoon for you. My name is Amy Nazuka Matatil, and I'm the author of 4 collections of poetry. I'm here on behalf of Barnes & Noble. I'm so excited. This sentence still gobsmacks me, but Barnes & Noble named my book, World of Wonders, their book of the year. And I have the privilege of hosting this incredible National Poetry Month event. I'm just going to give a quick rundown of I'll be chatting with today, and then I want to encourage you all, whether or not you're on YouTube or on Twitter or on Facebook, to drop any questions you have about poetry, about writing, about these books that we'll be discussing here in just a little bit. Please continue to drop them in the chat, and we will get to them as many as we can by the end of the session here this afternoon. All right. First up, we have, first of all, I just want to say something. Look at these gorgeous covers. They're all available at Barnes & Noble, of course, but I just want to say to the participants today, it's been so thrilling to be able to spend this time digging into these books and feeling really enriched during a month in particular that has been so taxing. Anytime I turn on the news, just finding comfort in all of y'all's words has been so beautiful to me. So I wanted to, I can't always say that, and I want to be able to say that here today as well, and I mean it with all my heart. All right, first up, we have Kwame Alexander, who is the author of Light for the World to See. He's the award-winning New York Times bestselling poet and author of over 35 books. He is a regular contributor to NPR's Morning Edition and the founding editor of Versify, a publishing imprint that aims to change the world one word at a time. I would also be remiss, because my 13-year-old son is watching. He's one of my 13-year-old son's favorite authors as well. So I know I don't get to often say that in an introduction. And next we have Dr. Martina Mcgowan, who is a physician who has spent a lifetime engaging formidable opponents. She's a writer, a potter, an artist, and a leader at work and within her community. Martina believes in the example of decide, learn, do, and improve as you go. And her collection here is called I Am the Rage. It is filled with these gorgeous illustrations that are so striking. Every one of these I've already put on order for graduation gifts. Some of my thesis students, I teach in the University of Mississippi's MFA program. My students are getting copies of these books because they're all books that I want to give out into this world, especially to young folks in particular. And finally, we have Courtney Marie Andrews, a poet and Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter from Phoenix, Arizona. And you don't know this, Courtney, I don't think, but I used to live in the Phoenix area in the 80s. So I grew up, like my elementary school years was just in Glendale, Arizona. And when she's not traveling around the world playing music, she's writing and hiking in the woods. And she's the author of Old Monarch, such a gorgeous, just homage to the outdoors. And I'd also be remiss to not mention that is Earth Day. So happy Earth Day as well. What I would like to do with you all today is I want to hear from everybody. And I want to I think the best thing to do is to kind of give everybody a taste of maybe like one poem from everybody. And so we'll get to that. I just want to plant that seed a little bit early so you know to expect that we'll be hearing an actual poem from everybody. And I wanted to, because we have such an eclectic group of poets, I wanted to kind of know, for me personally, but also for everybody out there, if you could, in a nutshell, like give us your trajectory into kind of how did you start making poems? Some of you I know came into this really late. Some of you are like, oh, I've been doing this, for many decades. But can you, each of you, give a little conversation into how you started? Like, how did you know, oh, I'm going to be breaking lines and not going margin to margin, that kind of thing. What was that moment of breaking the line? And talk about your trajectory leading us to your most recent collections. Let me see, Martina, can we start with you?
I would be the one who probably came to this latest. I've written prose, a great deal of prose most of my life. I have a blog that I've done for the last 10 years or so. The last 3 or 4 years, I decided to try my hand at some poetry instead and start breaking those and learning some forms. Obviously too late in life for going back to school, but having spent lots of times with poems and poetry, I felt it was time to try to focus on that as well.
Okay. Great. Wonderful. Courtney, how about you?
Well, I started writing poems when I was a kid, actually. And then when I found out I was a singer, I merged the two and started writing songs and put down poetry for a bit, and then reintroduced myself to it in high school when I was reading a lot of poets, and yeah, just picked it kind of back up in my late 20s.
Fantastic. And Courtney, did you name yourself? Like, did you tell your friends, like, I'm writing poetry? Like, I was always scribbling in my notebooks, but I was like almost embarrassed to say, oh, I think these are poems, that kind of thing. Did you claim that word, poet?
I didn't claim that word until fairly recently. I think because I'd always identified as a songwriter, and the process of learning how different the two mediums are has been very interesting. So I think maybe there was a moment when I was a teenager where I was like liken myself to a poet, but that was only a ruse to find mystery as a child.
Good. No, I was just gonna say I bow down to people who can claim that so early, because it wasn't until mid 20s for me, and even then, yeah, who am I kidding? Even today, it's still I still have what is it, imposter syndrome every time I go to my desk. Kwame, how about you? Can you talk about your just the origins of when you knew I'm gonna hit that line break right now, instead of going margin to margin?
Right. I think for me, I didn't find poetry; it found me.
Interesting.
And I probably want to say it found me at a very early age, because my mother had introduced me to Dr. Seuss, Fox and Socks, as a 3-year-old. and that led me, and then she introduced me to Lucille Clifton, who before she wrote for us adults, she wrote children's picture books.
That's right. So, a lot of people don't know that. Yeah.
So I had every one of her Everett Anderson picture books.
Everett Anderson, yes.
Yeah, and so she read to me a lot of Langston Hughes. I owned a copy of Spin a Soft Black Song, which was published in 1970, maybe 1 or 2. And so as a 3-year-old, that was my book, and that was by Nikki Giovanni. So Fox and Socks was my favorite poem as a 3-year-old. So at school, at daycare, preschool, on Riverside Drive on the Upper West Side, one day I had built a house out of blocks, and at the end of the day, I wanted to show my mom, and so this kid came and knocked over my blocks. Oh no! And so in my best, the only weapons I really had were my words, and so as a Dr. Seuss fanatic, I said, "Those were my blocks that you flipped. Lest you want a quick payback, better fix my quick block stack." And the kids started crying. So when my mother got to school, the teachers were like, "Mrs. Alexander, we have a problem. Your son is arrogant. He intimidates the other kids with his words." And my mother said, "Thank you. We teach him to use words."
Yeah, really, like, what's the problem,
That was the beginning for me.
Oh, Kwame, I did not know that. I read up on different interviews and stuff, but I did not know that about the origins. And I just, hats off to Mama Alexander for doing that, because I did not know, this is how sad, I did not know. And I went to like a pretty ritzy high school. I did not know there were any living poets until my junior year in college. Wow. And I just think of like how different my adolescence would have been had I known Lucille Clifton, had I known Rita Dove, had I known Naomi Shihab Nye, you know, I think, and they were out there, they were writing. My teachers were not teaching living writers, you know, so.
Well, their teachers weren't teaching them living writers either.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been a cycle. That's why what we're doing is so important.
Exactly. Well, I'm dying, you know, Martina, can you kick us off with like maybe share one poem, and then I'll and then we'll dive and we'll talk a little bit more. Then maybe Courtney, I'll ask you, and then Kwame as well. Can you share with us just one selection from I Am the Rage?
Okay. I'm going to read a new song. A new song, a new story. Orphaned by a nation that castigates us at every turn, looking to any individual acts of violence as justification for a condemnation of an entire race. How do we get to middle ground, the golden mean, to find a way forward, a way out of this never-ending cycle of outright war and unfettered bloodshed, out of this spiral toward the death of all things good, to a way of peace, armistice, without swallowing the bitter pill of business as usual, which only brings us back to strife again? How do we turn down the violence of us versus them versus us, mortal enemies on this battlefield of life? What is the escape route from this labyrinth of animosity and remorse if no one will yield? Who holds the secret unction that can heal the scars of a crippled nation? How do we find the pathway to a new story, a new song, and stop the reiteration of the old? A story that has never furnished us with real hope of better tomorrow, and explodes or collapses on an extraordinarily regular and predictable path every time we play that old record. Who will hear a new story, a new narrative, a new anecdote about how we can live in actual and factual harmony and altruism before we destroy ourselves?
That same old song, that same old record, gosh, especially poignant this week as well. I was reading through this and I was thinking like, Martina is like a sage for this week. There's no way you would know what would happen this week, the conviction and things like that. And yet it's like you almost don't want to be prescient. You know, you almost wish you didn't have that wisdom, because you were almost foretelling it. This was like a fortune telling book in some ways. So thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Well, it's a fortune telling in so much as it's the history of Black people over the past 400 years.
Exactly.
So Martina is a sage and a prophet and a descendant, and will become an ancestor and a living witness to all of this stuff that we've experienced.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's so powerful to see that on the page. And again, I just want to say, like, just the sheer beauty with these cutouts or these illustrations. It really, it's a tactile experience when you're reading this. And then also here, for me, I was hearing, I had CNN on the background, so it's a surreal experience. Like coming in, getting the news in stereo, live and in stereo almost, in some ways. And I spent my 20s, I consider Columbus, Ohio my home. And then so to see the news, the horrifying news come out of there as I was finishing up your book, again, it's just like, yeah, it's
same song.
Same song, yeah. Courtney, can you share a poem from your collection, from Old Monarch? It's Earth Day, so if you had one, I mean, obviously you read what you want to read, but I know we've got questions coming up here soon from the audience, but I was really just struck with like all the mentions of Saguaros and just even like one of the questions I'll be asking everybody is just talking about like the outdoors in poetry. So much of the poetry that was taught to me was so interior and so much like you would almost think that nobody goes outside except old white men, that's why yours was so refreshing to see this very distinctive kind of feminist gaze on the landscape itself. Can you share a poem, Courtney?
Yeah, I'll share one in honor of Earth Day. This is a poem called Gratitude for Blue. Hallelujah for the Montana sky, lakes, ponds, lazy long rivers, Frank Sinatra's eyes, railroad overalls, at times my disposition. We are so lucky to see a pigment served so sweetly to our senses, luckier than the tribe in Namibia who never had a word for it. Blue is the color of time, hydrangeas, herons, crabs, peacocks, periwinkles, sharks, forget-me-nots. Hearts go blue too. Without it, how would one dream of sailing the ocean to the very edges of the sky or bask in the mystery of somewhere else, afar off today to discover your own hue and the swinging pendulum of living? Even the darkest shades are capable of being illuminated by the sun.
So lovely, thank you. I love too that, one of the things that struck me actually about everybody's book, but yours in particular, Courtney, is that I forgot kind of that I'm here coming to you all live from Oxford, Mississippi. I kind of forgot where I was. And that's the best part of reading, is that it feels like you can, when you're reading the poems that are really like full of metaphor, full of you just get ensconced in this story. These lyric moments, you forget where you are. So I feel like I traveled in the West, in particular, without ever leaving my chair, which is pretty amazing given that we're in a pandemic and indoors, Kwame, can you talk about, I also want to talk about just the physicality of this book. I'm such a tactile person, and this is already in the gift bags of all my graduating thesis students. But it's also what I thought was so striking. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they were so drawn to the, look at the inside of the pictures, like "We will not die," in this bold graphic kind of page, and then it's the repetition. It's the anaphora of we can't drive a car, we can't walk the street, we can't ride a bike, we can't run away. This, I dare say, is more powerful and kind of, I hate even using the word top, but kind of gives more insight than anything their Asian American mama can say about like trying to interpret what's going on in the news. I feel like the light bulbs for them clicked when they saw this in using these, poetic forms of like, this repetition, the highlighted, even just with the word, the typography is highlighted, the unforgettable, and un is in yellow, things like that. So that's why I think, and this is not, I would say, not at all just for kids. This is for the 85-year-old who still thinks, why does everything have to be about race? And, and then also for the 10-year-old who has a lot of questions that I don't know sometimes how to answer. And so I wonder, I know like it's 1,000 words. So it's hard, I know to excerpt it, but is there maybe a moment to read from this? Because it's not just one poem to share, but maybe could you read just a little bit from this, maybe?
Well, I mean, you just read a little bit from it, and you did a great job too. So kudos to you. But I think you pretty much summed it up. I mean, it's a testimony. It's when I was 11 years old, my father took me to a march in Brooklyn. And we marched, I didn't want to go. I was afraid to march because I was afraid, because I knew we were marching over the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
And it was the killing of a Black man by a police officer named Arthur Miller. And I did not want to go to this march because I felt like we were going to die if we went. And so I cried and screamed, and we arrived at this march because I was dragged to it. I was forced to go. And we're marching over this bridge, and I'm crying, and we get to the other side, and the police officers are on horses, and they're in riot gear, and then the leader of the march, Reverend Herbert Dartrey, he started chanting, "We're fired up, we can't take no more. We're fired up, we can't take no more." And then I start, and everybody starts chanting it, and we're in this moment of song, and I'm comforted. and I find my footing on that bridge, and the tears dry, and I sort of find my voice. And I couldn't articulate it then, but I sort of understood the importance of voice and rhythm and lifting up your voice
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
things that matter. And so with that book, I tried to capture that spirit in this book. I tried to make this book a rally in verse, if I could capture that energy. So that's, you know, that's the 1,000 words on race and hope.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's I love that, because, you know, at the end, can I give away the back page, the last page?
You cannot.
I can't tell if you're kidding or not.
What's the point of that? Why would you give it away?
All right. It's just the end. Okay, well then I'll give something that's not the end.
Okay.
And this is the page that my boys pointed out. They're like, Mom, look at this yellow color and the rays. It says, who shine for the, they're talking about people, the people that are rising up, who shine their light for the world to see and don't stop till the break of dawn. And then they were saying, like, Mom, look at the sun rays. The sun is not contained. It's going off the page. And I just love, you know, I like to, you know, pat myself on the back. That has nothing to do with their mama being a poet. They just discovered that from the chanting. They were reading this out loud. I didn't ask them to read it out loud. I could hear them upstairs saying it, and I could feel them doing this kind of rallying cry, as like what you said. And, you know, they've been virtual learning at home. And this is the first book of poetry that they came down wanting to talk to me, not their mama saying, hey, did you read that book I gave you? You know, they wanted to talk to me about this. And so I love that spirit there. I won't give out the back page, but it's, when I got to the end, it was a collective sigh. And it was also, I wanted to spring forth. So during a time, I think, when all I want to do is almost sit and hide over, you know, carry a weighted blanket over me. What I love about all of these books is that they made me want to reach out and spring forth into the world. So just thank you all so much for that. Before we get to these questions that are jumping in now for me, I have a question for you. And it's something that gets asked a lot of me, but now I get to be the interviewer here. I don't know if I have an answer, so I want to preface it with that, but I'm curious to see, like, what do you say to writers who are feeling intimidated by the blank page in their notebook? They know what they want to say. They have so much that's just been bubbling up, not just now in the last year, but they've had it. They've had injustice handed to them. They've had rage seething up. They've wanted to sing the praises of the outdoors. They just don't know where to start because A, we're in a pandemic. B, there's so much violence and vitriol on the news. They're worried about climate change. They're worried about just sending kids off to school. How does one start? If you could give out, like, maybe, I'm hesitant to even be prescriptive during a pandemic, but what do you say to people like that? They have so much to say. They're just feeling overwhelmed and they want to write it out. How do you get them to start? What would your advice be? I don't know. Martina, do you have, I'm so struck that there's so many, like you mentioned sweet, sweet magnolia trees in a poem that says, America, something is wrong, you know? And so there's so much juxtaposition. I feel like you do so much in such small space where there's a lot of white space around to indicate silence and settling in. But how do you break that white page? How do you break the screen? How do you begin?
I know it sounds too simple. Have to begin. I'll get a composition notebook, whatever paper you have, and just write everything that you feel about the situation. You can always revise it and pare it down later, but just write your heart out. You know, write until you finish crying over whatever it is, and you can reshape it later if you choose. You know, if you're only writing for yourself, you don't ever have to reshape it. But you know, write what's in your heart.
Okay. And you're right. It's like deceptively simple, right? Just you can't revise anything if you didn't write, you know? So yeah. Courtney, do you have something concrete and tangible to give, like on those days where you're like, what do my songs matter? What do my poems matter? How do I even begin this? I don't know. Do you have something that you'd share?
I think we're really quick to judge ourselves and be really self-critical. And I think if I were to offer any piece of advice when you're writing, it's also to just begin and free of judgment. Writing is your place to improvise and to be free, not to confine into smaller spaces. So I think just kind of letting go and letting yourself be free in the words is the most powerful thing you can do.
Okay. Yeah. There's a power in being free on the page, right? Especially when maybe you don't feel free in life for whatever reason, you know. Yeah, good. Kwame, how about you? I have one of your books. I think it was for elementary school teachers on how to have like a poetry. What is that? I'm blanking on the name now. All of a sudden, I'm looking here in my bookshelves. It's on how to bring, how to create like a poetry event in your elementary school or in your high school. Like simply like, oh, here's the step process for teachers who don't know how to do that. I was swooning over that. I was looking over that again last night. Because again, you're laying the groundwork for a whole nother generation of students to have power. Like I'm thinking back to what you said about getting power in words, and finding, I don't know, a confidence in showing the power of metaphor, showing the power of rhyme and repetition. What do you say? Yours, I'm directing just a little bit more like, what about to the kid in middle school whose friends don't think writing is cool, or who hasn't really been encouraged by a teacher, but they are starting to feel the bug of writing. What advice can you give to that hesitant middle schooler in particular, who doesn't really have outward support except for what they see in books? So, but they don't have that outward support that maybe you and I did from teachers or from a neighbor or an older sibling or something like that. What advice would you give?
Well, before I answer that, I got to answer the other question because that was a great question. I need to get my 2 cents in.
Oh, go for it.
So it's a couple quick things. Number one, when I look at Martina's bookshelf behind her, all lit up, all those books all organized and the color, I'm inspired. I want to go write.
Yeah.
Like, so that's one thing. When I hear Courtney read her poetry and the lilt in her voice, and I hear the music, I hear the piano, I hear the guitar, I want to go write. Like, ekphrasis, we are inspired by art. We are inspired if we are willing participants in life. If we are walking through life paying attention, we will write. I mean, we will interpret. We will want to express. Every morning I wake up at 6:30 and I sit right over there and I write. Well, I don't write immediately because 35 books in at 6 a.m. in the morning, I still don't know what to write. I'm sitting here looking at the blank page like, what the heck am I gonna do? So I experience that every day. So the simplest tool for writers who are trying to write something, I know my colleague said begin, but here's the thing, the trick is butt in chair. Just sit in the chair and listen to some Oscar Peterson or some Americana or something to get inspired. It will happen. If you sit in that chair long enough, it will happen. My advice for the middle school student, it's not for the kid, it's for the teacher. If you want kids to want to write, give them books that they want to read. It's not enough to give kids books that you think they should read. The way we become writers is by reading. The way we become good writers is by reading a lot. If you want your kids to want to write, give them books that they're gonna want to read, and they will be inspired. T.S. Eliot said, immature writers imitate, and mature writers steal.
Yeah, That's exactly it. And, and I think you can figure out with, um, teachers know what books kids are excited about. And I'm always so disheartened when I hear, teachers say like, we shouldn't, not too much fantasy here. Like, why? Why are you dictating? Maybe that kid should be reading fantasy because they're going to be writing, something else that needs that as a foundation. When I was growing up in Phoenix in the 80s, no teacher ever suggested to me that I write poetry. Not a one, but they were giving me books. Gosh, what were the books they were giving me? Well, first of all, they didn't give me any books that had anybody of color in them, so that was kind of a bummer. And so I just assumed, oh, Asian Americans aren't outside. But that's not true because all the Asian Americans I know love the outdoors, that kind of thing. It was just weird that my school library did not carry books with Asian Americans really doing anything, and forget about being outside, just doing anything. So yeah, I love what you said there, Kwame, for sure. All right, I want to tackle the questions that are coming in here. They're being fed to me here, and I wanted to start out, let me see. Someone is asking, do any of you do research when writing a poem? And if so, can you talk about research that goes into that? I imagine it's very different than someone writing about the pollination of a rare flower in Indonesia, that kind of thing. But what kind of research, if any, do you do?
So I wrote this book called Becoming Muhammad Ali, and it is a novel in verse. So it's about 300 poems. So in order to write this book about Muhammad Ali as a kid, we don't know about his childhood. So I wrote about his childhood. I listened to about 15 hours of oral history recordings of his best friends talking about his childhood. I read a bunch of books. I flew to Louisville, Kentucky and went to his house where he was raised at 3302 Grand Avenue. It's a small pink house and it's now a museum. So I went to the house to go kind of like immerse myself inside and sit down, but it was closed down. But it was like the windows were there. So I was trespassing and peeping in the windows and looking around. I saw the furniture that his mother bought. I saw a poem he wrote on the wall that was framed after he won the Olympics. I was in the backyard walking around. At the Brown Hotel in Louisville, they have a Muhammad Ali suite. It's $1,000 a night. I went to the hotel. I sent the receipt to my publisher and I had them pay for it. I'm not paying for that. Anyway, I stayed in the Muhammad Ali suite 3 nights. I slept in his bed. I took a bath in his tub.
Oh my goodness.
So I wanted to immerse myself in all things Cassius Clay so that when I began to sit down and write this book, I would have this frame of reference that I couldn't quantify necessarily, but it had seeped in me.
Yeah, interesting. Literally taking the steps that Cassius Clay, that Muhammad Ali took in Louisville. Oh my goodness, I love that. Anybody else? Different research?
I think probably for all of us, it's a different kind of immersion, whether it's immersion in nature, and I do write about nature some, not nearly as well as our colleague here, but I think that's it. Immersion and fact checking. Several of my poems are about current stories, and as much as I can, I go back and check the facts, not just interpretation of the facts. So I think Kwame hit it. It's immersing yourself in it.
I have one here from Antonia, and maybe I wonder if Courtney, you can tackle this one, and other people can jump in as well. Is it difficult to share events that have happened to you personally into your poems with the rest of the world? And so I want to also be clear too, like, I don't want to assume anything, we don't know. I always tell my students, like, this is poetry, not autobiography. And until the poet says otherwise, I'm assuming this is a persona. But maybe if you could just talk about maybe that, even just that concept. Do you write based on events from your autobiography? Or is this all like, you know, everybody has such interesting slippery answers on that. Who is the I of your poems, things like that. Is it hard to kind of put yourself out there, even through persona? Lots to think about there with personal stories, Courtney.
Yeah, I feel I've come to terms that everything is, nothing is off limits. It's really important to not limit the writing. And, you know, like you said, it's poetry, so there's always a little bit of masking and mystery in that. So I try not to think too much about that and just put it out, and people can interpret it whatever way they want. It's kind of better if you don't say, this is an autobiographical poem, you know, and just kind of leave that up for interpretation.
Good, good. All right. Well, we're winding up here. I feel like I could chat with you all for another hour on this. We're just scratching the surface here, but maybe as a way to kind of wind down here, can you all talk about, there's some, I'm a Capricorn, so I had about 20 other questions prepared here, but the one I want to end on is just maybe, because we're still, I'm in the state of Mississippi, and our governor just decided nobody needs a mask anymore. So I feel like I'm still very much in a pandemic, and then other people think, no, the pandemic is done, you know. So I'm kind of trying to navigate that. But what do you say, what advice for writers do you have to say who are feeling extra heavy these days? You know, their mental health is maybe not the greatest after being kind of isolated for over a year. You turn on the news and there's another killing, another record, another same song, you know, that kind of thing. Worries of climate change. How would you, how does one have hope? How does one, where do you personally turn to for hope, for turning towards the light rather than despair? It's kind of a, it's not even a writer question, it's a human question, is can we end on a note of hope, or how to hold hope in our hearts even when the world is crushing us? And I think everybody has different, you know, responses, I think, in some ways to that. I don't know. Is that even something we can answer? I wanted to at least try. Anyone who wants to start us off there? How does one maintain, how about this? How does one cultivate or maintain hope? And that's also fine. I also want to say, I don't want to be this Pippi Longstocking and say, oh, all these killings are happening. Now we got to be positive. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just, how does one carry on and fight for the light, fight for justice, continue that feeling of springing forth that I had from all of your books that gave me such power and hope for the future? How do we carry that on to tomorrow and the next week and in 2022 and in 2025, you know? I don't know, it's kind of a big question, but I did want to end there with a note of hope.
I think for most of us, I speak for myself, that you have to carry some spark of hope and light within yourself. And the world can be very heavy, can always seem very cruel. For a number of years, you know, Facebook and social media have made it a little bit difficult, but for many years I'd go on a news fast. You know, you don't have to fill up your day and night and the moments before you go to sleep with the latest video of someone being shot on their doorstep. You know, you can read or you know, journey someplace else by reading. Even for TV, you can watch something else. You know, streaming has spoiled us, and we're not really chained to what comes on next. Spend time with your family, spend time outdoors, spend time with yourself. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing for the pandemic, that many people have not spent a great deal of time alone and getting to know themselves and becoming friends with themselves. And that's a journey by itself. But I think hope and light have to live inside no matter what's going on around you. That's my feeble attempt at an answer.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Martina. Others? I don't know. How would you answer that, Kwame? It looked like you had a light bulb moment going right there.
I think you read "I Am the Black Rage," and you get informed, and you become and you enhance your understanding of what's happening in the world through the eyes of this Black woman. And then you go outside and you sit in the park and you read Courtney's book, and you honor and you treasure the mighty river, and the tree, and you listen to the trees, and you feel, and then you remember what Langston Hughes said. So you go and get their books. That's the first thing you do, y'all. Go on Barnes & Noble right now and get their books. And then the next thing you do is you remember what Langston Hughes said. If you want to find hope, we're going to find hope through books. Okay, this is the thing. We're going to find our hope through reading. You remember what Langston Hughes said? I've been scarred and battered, my hopes the wind been scattered. Snow has frizzed me, sun has baked me. I think between them, they done tried to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living. But I don't care. I'm still here. So you remember that we are still here. That's the hope. And you work to make it better.
So good. That's such a great prescription, to get yourself educated. Thank you for saying that. And then go outside. I think that's like, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you. And I love that too. Like, we are still here. We are still here. Courtney, I'll give you the last kind of, how do we go forth after National Poetry Month? I don't want this to be up to me. National Poetry Month is every month, Earth Day is every day. But how do we carry this energy, this spirit of knowing the power in words, knowing the power in compression and metaphor and music? How do we carry that? I know that's every day for you as well, but how do we carry that forth even when we on those hard days?
Well, Kwame and Martina put it perfectly. I think that one of the most beautiful things you can do in this modern world is have a real moment with some real live humans and go out into the world and experience it. And I think being educated on all the injustices in the world and climate change is super important. And I think Kwame hit the nail on the head when he said, educate yourself, then go live it. Go live it. Hope is in your mother's eyes, hope is in your family and your friends and the people around you. Control what you can and what's around you. It starts with you. And if you're filled with hope, it's surely gonna rub off on somebody else. So
it's contagious. Yeah. Well, that's a pitch perfect note that I want to end on here. I thank you all so much. I just a reminder for everybody, all three of these books are they're like vitamins. Get yourself some vitamins, take vitamins, get yourself hydrated, but also take your vitamins. Purchase these from Barnes & Noble. Martina, Kwame, Courtney, it was an honor to chat with you. I feel fortified, and I can't always say that at the end of National Poetry Month. Usually I'm like, just holding on, dragging myself across the finish line. I feel fortified. So thank you so much. Thank you all, everybody out there who joined in, who tuned in, and hope you are having a word-filled, metaphor-filled, rhyme-filled, and music-filled Earth Day and National Poetry Month. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.